On today's Newsmakers, I recently went to the White House to sit down with Paula White-Cain and Jenny Korn. They are the directors of the White House Faith Office, a new initiative, a government agency bent on ensuring religious liberty and religious freedom, but it goes much deeper than that. Both Jenny and Paula will explain what exactly they're trying to accomplish, how they first came to work for President Donald Trump, and much, much more. Here are Jenny Korn and Paula White-Cain.
So, Paula, you could be doing anything in the world, and you've chosen to be doing this right now at the White House. Why?
That's a great question, Billy, because I don't, for me personally, know if I chose it or if I really seek God's will and maybe it chose me, but there was a strong conviction. A strong conviction. Many people know that I've had a relationship with President Trump and his family for over 24 years, and I hope we get to talk about that. But a strong conviction because as we saw a quick deterioration of religious liberties of our country, of the moral fabric, of just when the FBI spies on the traditional Catholic Church, when 23 pro-lifers who are silently praying in front of an abortion clinic are arrested under the Biden administration, when a coach by the name of Coach Kennedy doesn't invite his whole Bible study out, kneels silently and prays alone on the side of a field and has to fight all the way up to the Supreme Court because he's been fired, he's lost everything because of silent prayer. Let's keep going. When a Navy SEAL who has given his everything, his courage, his willingness to die for our country, I can't even imagine the missions that he's been on, has to choose between his covenant with God and his faith and his covenant with the government that under the Biden administration said you're going to be stripped of everything, which he was, with a wife of just a few years and a child on the way, first child. He was stripped of absolutely everything. And when that happens, because he had to get a forced vaccination that violated his religious belief, we're in trouble. And that's only the beginning. I can go to a whole lot more, and I hope we get into it because there's been so much targeted discrimination.
Why do you think people didn't? It's because everything you're talking about, it was out there, but people didn't know about it. Why do you think that is?
Because I think we keep our head buried in the sand often. The Bible says, look up on the field, and John chapter 4, look, the harvest is ripe. I think we just get this really narrow tunnel vision sometimes. And if it hasn't, we think it's not going to directly impact us, but it does. You know, people think, oh, politics, that's up there. But I love Jenny's saying, and I'll steal it right now. Jennifer Korn, who is the faith director of the White House Faith Office, says politics matter because policy matters, and policy matters because people matter. And whether they believe it or not, politics is in their life, deciding how much they're going to pay on their property tax, if they can be zoned right, if they go to a church, if that church can have a daycare, because a secular daycare is much easier to zone than one that is of faith. If they want to adopt a child or get involved in foster care, there are going to be rules and regulations on them that are not on other people that are not of faith. We could continue to go on and on why people are maybe blinded in tunnel vision, think it's not going to hit us, but it does. Or perhaps they don't speak up. But there is a movement that I believe, and I think people did see this because President Trump won the popular vote. Not just the electoral, the popular.
By a fair amount.
Absolutely. And that was people saying enough is enough. So why did I sign up? Because I had an unprecedented opportunity given to me by this amazing president, this man who understands the importance of faith, to be in the first time ever newly created historic White House Faith Office that gets to fight for people, whether they're on the street homeless or whether they're the CEO and they're being targeted because of their faith. And the greatest thing that we do, we have 8 different tenets in here, but the greatest thing to me is religious liberty. And that is that every human being on this earth has the right to approach God and to worship him. It's enshrined in our Constitution. It's our inalienable rights, not given by government, as we always say, but given by God. And suddenly there are people in administrations, Biden administration, Obama administration, that says you don't have that right. There are mayors in Houston that started years ago subpoenaing your
Sermons. That was a big case.
It's huge. I mean, I can go on and on. This didn't start, but President Trump realized it and was willing to walk away from everything. Everything. This didn't start for President Trump in 2016. He came to me. I've known him 24 years.
Let's talk about that. And I
I
want to get back into all the policy, but you and I had a lunch a few years ago. It was, gosh, before he was, or maybe when he was elected, and we talked about this, and you told me the story about how you met, and I found it so fascinating. So take us through that journey of you connecting with him and how the relationship.
Absolutely, and this is why I say, perhaps it chose me because what is the random outcome or possibility
Here you are.
of this happening? And everyone says you're not qualified. Not everyone, because I am very skilled. I've been in ministry for 40 years.
And you're passionate about this. You feel called into it. I mean, as you just stated, it was very clear how passionate you.
Well, I'm extremely passionate about this. And that is, if you look over the life of my ministry, and we'll get to President Trump, whether I'm living in LA for 2 years in Nickerson Gardens, Waverly, and Watts, because after the Rodney King beatings, I'm going in, I'm fighting, I'm negotiating between the Bloods and the Crips. I mean, whether you look at Tampa, and there's no longer several Section 8 housing because we elevated the lowest 17% out of poverty. And we had cosmetology school, we had 250 outreaches being able to help people. If you go to the church right now in Apopka, Florida, and you see people lined up from 5 a.m. in the morning because they've got to choose between, am I going to feed my family or am I going to get gas in my car? No longer since President Trump's been in. It was horrific under the Biden administration. We've done 30-something million pounds of food in the last 4 years from there. This is my passion, being able to help people, especially for religious liberty. So how did it start? And this is where I was bringing President Trump in 2011, because it didn't start for him in 2016. If you look at tapes 30 years ago, the things that he's fighting for now, he was saying then.
On Oprah, he was talking about these
Absolutely.
things in like 1988 or something.
And when I met him, so he called up and they said, Mr. Trump's on the line. I said, yeah, sure. Yeah, right. And they said, no, for real, Mr. Trump's on the line.
And you had never talked at that point.
Oh, I mean, the crazy thing about this, Billy, though, is we're a big soul winning ministry. We believe that, we pray for people and that the Holy Spirit convicts people and reveals Jesus is the Son of God, soul winning. We share the gospel. And so we would always do top 10 every year, top 10. And this is kind of interesting because I know I never met him, I mean, officially, formally, but my family had been saved, friends, neighbors, etc. And I, just like an innocent kid, I said, okay, God, who do I put on my list this year? And I was in prayer, and the first person I put was Donald J. Trump.
And it just came to your heart.
Long before I met him.
Wow.
Then I put Michael Jackson. And then I listed 10 celebrities. This shows you the power of prayer. All 10 of those I either prayed for, met, or won to the Lord. That's how crazy this is. And how
Well, now I need to know. In another interview, we're going to have to do the 10.
okay.
Today, but we will.
Crazy. So he calls me up. I get on the phone. He says, you've got the it factor. I said, oh, sir, we call that the anointing. So that was our hello. Exactly. And then he goes on to verbatim. And when I say verbatim, I mean he is repeating a series that I did called The Value of Vision. And I thought, man, he listens better than most of the people in my church. So one thing led to another. And he said, are you ever in New York? Well, I was. I was in a Bible study for the New York Yankees. I said, when you're in, come by and I'd love to meet. So I dropped by his office, like many people do. Very interesting, because a lot of people that, shunned him were not there the first term. I saw them all the time.
Yes, they
office.
loved him back then.
Absolutely. Begging for appointments, standing there, wanting more time, not wanting to leave. It's just interesting how human beings can be. And so went in, his staff took me out with himself to a Jean Georges. I'd never been in such a fancy restaurant in my entire life. Um, and so we had a lovely meal. He said, well, whenever you're in the city, come back. So I did. And the second time, and I say this extremely humbly because it's like now I'm going, just a boldness came over me. I prayed, I sought the Lord, and I said, God, what is my purpose? Because I look for purpose in everything. What's the purpose with this man, Mr. Trump? And I felt that the Lord spoke to me. I'm not saying this is for every person because everyone takes and tries to trust. I'm sure we'll talk about that. I said, for me, it was show him who I am. And to me, that interpreted as just live out a Christian life.
Mm-hmm.
So I did. Can I pray for you? Can I do this for you? Da, da, da. So the second time I went in, I felt very impressed by God just shared this with him. And I said, "Sir," and the Lord said, "Never take a dime from him." Now, I've kept that covenant with God. I've never received a dime from President Trump. I won't take a penny here.
I was gonna say, you don't take a salary
I
here.
will not, because it's connected to President Trump, and that was it's kind of like Samson, don't get a haircut. Now, that doesn't mean everyone in the world
But for you,
get a haircut.
your call from God
I call
was to not take a penny from him.
exactly.
Okay, well,
So if someone, I think whatever the Lord says to us, we have to be obedient. And sometimes God gives you instructions that you don't even fully understand. So for me, I went in, I said, "I don't want your money. I have enough of my own." Now, that was hilarious, Billy, because I basically, had enough to cover my little
right.
tiny bills, at the time. He was worth 6.5 billion. I don't think I knew that, but it wouldn't have mattered because God
Just have
said,
to follow what God
but it
says.
was bold. Then the second thing was, "I don't want your fame. I have enough of my own." That was hilarious too, because I'm on a few little Christian stations here, and here's this worldwide, I mean, very successful businessman that's done about everything. And I said, "I want your soul." And I got so nervous because I thought that came out wrong. And I turned around and I was like, I ran out. Now knowing him, I'm thinking that was just Trump-esque enough.
Yeah, they would probably appreciate it. That's something he would say.
Yeah, exactly. So that's how the relationship with he and his family and his staff and so many others started. And he began to call me pastor. And so 2011, you're like, "How are you here?" 2000, this didn't start for President Trump with People in Faith. 2011, he said, "Paula," I'll never forget some of the things. He said, "I don't like the way our country's going." And he said, "I'm thinking about running for president. What do you think?" I
What
told
year was that when he first?
2011.
Okay.
And he said, I said, I told him what I thought. And he turns around and goes, "What is God saying?" Now he knew me well enough by then. I went, "Oh, don't do this to me." I said, "Sir," I said, "I can't say that without really praying and seeking God. Can I have some people up to Trump Tower?" I brought about 30 pastors and faith leaders up, and we prayed for about 6.5 hours
Wow.
there. And he'd come in, go out. He wasn't there the whole time. Have him go out. And he pulled me down to his office and he said, "Well, what's God saying?" And Billy, I'll never forget, because I'm a fighter. I mean, I'm just, one of those girls that played with GI Joes and said Barbie dolls. And so I just was born in that. And so I looked at him, and I usually don't cry. And I said, "Sir, you're going to be president." I said, "But I hate the price you're going to pay." And every time they've had me on Radio Row, I look, and it's easier for me to talk about the price and this is still difficult, the 2 impeachments, the harassment, the Russian hoax, the lies, the lawfare. But the most difficult thing for me is to talk about still July 13th
Mm.
at 6:11. I was in Atlanta at the stadium there. Ralph and Joanne Reed were coming to meet me. My husband, John, who plays with Journey, was performing that night with Journey and Def Leppard, and we were on a summer tour. And Joanne texted me as I was going to get him and said they shot the president. And so I was confused. I was like, because I thought Biden. I was like, and she went, and when she wrote Trump, I froze, and I just ran into the room, which was John's dressing room. Started saying, "Get the TV on, get the TV on," and I fell on my face. Sorry.
Don't be sorry.
And my son and daughter-in-law were there. My grandkids were there, and I just said, "We gotta pray." And of course, no one knew what was happening, if he was dead, if he was alive, and because it was so fast. And so I knew who was traveling. I knew who was around him, and I started texting him and calling, and I said, "Just tell me if he's okay." Then, of course, we saw him get up, and, you know, he knows that day, and he says it over and over, because we look at all the things like, what are the chances?
I mean, turning your head just enough. I've written a bunch on this because I think it's fascinating, and thank God he turned his head the way he did, or else we'd be having a very different conversation right now.
100%, a millimeter of a second, but the chart shouldn't have gone up at that time, it goes up at the end, it shouldn't have been on that side.
Can I ask you a question about him? And as much as you're comfortable sharing, because people have looked at him and they've said, obviously, there are all sorts of critiques about tone and all of that. We've all heard these things, but that there was a shift in him after that event. And he's kind of said this too, in terms of even God and how he sees things. Have you noticed that shift in him?
Absolutely. President Trump has always been a Christian and a man of faith, and I can tell you, if he would have died, and I believe that you receive Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior and believe He's the Son of God, and you will spend eternity with Him. And President Trump, as we all saw this Easter, has that same exact belief. I was actually the one in 2016 that said, because they were coming at him with theological questions that I'm going to answer yours there. And I was like, he's not a pastor. He's like, I'm like, 99% of people in my congregation can't answer this. And they were trapping him up. I mean, let me give you one. There was a situation at Liberty when we went this first outing when he said 2 Corinthians.
Yes. Yeah.
And I prayed for him. Corey and I were with them, Corey Lewandowski, and we went to sit over with the family and with John, my husband, first lady. I mean, everyone's there. And he gets up and comes off stage. I'm greeting him. And Corey goes, it's 2 Corinthians. And he goes, Paula? I go, well, technically it's 2 Corinthians. And he goes, well, that's not what he said. And he points to someone. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding me. And it's a person pretty big in the faith realm who also happened to be at the time, I think, very supportive of Ted Cruz, Senator Cruz. And people forget that battle is going on, I thought. And it was my first introduction to, oh, they're going to play dirty in faith too.
Wow.
And that was, I said, sir, and I was with Mike Huckabee, is after 1,000 pastors luncheon. I said, I'm going to recommend to you that you hold your faith very close to your chest, because he had his picture confirmation. You got to remember, he went to Sunday school usually twice, church. He was in church 3 times. His mother was a praying, godly woman, sometimes at Saturday school, sometimes 2 times a week. But his formation as a child was deeply rooted in faith. His dad's taking him to Billy Graham crusade, impacted, sits under Norman Vincent Peale to the day he retires at 92 years. He can quote me so many sermons from Norman Vincent Peale. I absolutely love talking through it. So was he different? Yes, he was.
Well, who wouldn't be?
And Billy, he knows without a shadow of a doubt that God saved him, and believes, like I do, that God saved him for a purpose and that he is now fulfilling that purpose. And I believe that too. So you ask me, why am I here? Why are we doing this? Because we're fighting for America, and America is the beacon of light for the world.
Well, and it feels very much like he came in with a plan that was, not that he didn't last time, but I think this feels very different. It was very strategic from day one. But a big part of this has been the White House Faith Office. And a lot of headlines have been surrounding this. And this is historic. And what you're doing is very different from what we've seen, especially in the recent past, but certainly in the past. Talk a little bit for those who don't know about the Faith Office. What is it? What are you trying to accomplish?
Well, first and foremost, I'm really excited to have. I'm the senior advisor to President Trump of the White House Faith Office. And to have with me today Jenny Korn, she's been in politics and policy for 25, 26, 24. Okay, I'm making you older, Jenny. For 24 years, she served under many administrations. She was with me. We've been working together for 9 years. She's the faith director. So you say, what is this? Now, we have 6 in the EOP, which is a policy director, a Christian engagement, a Jewish engagement, a grant center coordinator that helps people find those micro and mini grants. And that's just executive office, the president. Every department has a faith leader. Every agency, they're either in place or they're getting put in place right now.
And was that happening before?
Not to the extent that President Trump has done this. So this is a newly created. People have had initiatives, partnerships, neighborhoods, community outreach, but not like President Trump. This is an office. And so we work, of course, with Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, with the directors, and then when needed and necessary, I brief President Trump. We work with National Security Council. If it's Christians abroad, that we are dealing with some really serious religious liberty issues. And that works all the way up to the president. We work with DOJ. We were just there for the DOJ task force of eradicating, every Christian bias and really looking and fact finding on those right now. And there's also the task force for anti-Semitism bias. So when we're dealing, and there's so many more things, but let's just talk about some of the things we do.
Yeah.
There's 8 tenets. We have briefings. We'll talk about that. We'll have listening sessions. We have working groups, but we do everything from mental health care, which we call flourishing minds, and brain health, to alleviating poverty, but we call that work, promoting work and sustainability. We want to help people. We reach out our hand and really look at policy to help bring Americans the absolute best possibilities. Foster care and adoption. Very difficult often for people of faith to adopt a child, where in other situations, it's pretty easy. Jenny, I'll let you keep going because I don't want to take it over.
Love to hear, because you've been doing this incredible work and you've been in the trenches for a long time. What is different right now about this office, and what are you guys doing? Feel free to dive in wherever you want.
Well, it's awesome. I've been working with Pastor Paula since 2016, and we met in Trump Tower during the campaign at a faith meeting, or faith coalition meeting. And then when I worked for President Trump all 4 years, from day one to the very last day, I have the scars to prove it. And we created the White House Faith and Opportunity Initiative. It was partly in the Office of Public Liaison and partly in the Office of Domestic Policy Council, which was great. And we had a lot of wins because President Trump made sure that the policies were helping on religious freedom. So then last year, Pastor Paula and myself went to go see the president and said, you guys did such a great job with the initiative, but we want to raise it. We want to really bring faith to the highest levels. And the president wanted to do that. He wanted to make faith a priority in the White House. So we put the idea in front of him to have this office, and, election happens, promises made, promises kept. Now we have this office. And a lot of people ask, like, what does the White House Faith Office actually do? They think that maybe she's the pastor of the White House, or I sit her Prince of Prayer.
No, it's just
So we are not the church of the White House. She was not the pastor of the White House. We are not creating theology. We are having a space where we are allowing people of faith to have a voice in the public policy that it directly affects them. And for far too long, the federal government has discriminated against people of faith through the IRS, through the Department of Justice, through the Department of State. We're getting stories. Pastor Paula just talked about the meeting we had at Department of Justice. 15 cabinet members who are part of this anti-Christian bias task force. In 1 week, Secretary Rubio reported that he put out an email saying, if you've experienced any anti-Christian bias or see any anti-Christian policies, please report them. In just 1 week, he had over 150 emails from different people on the different policies in the State Department. So this is deeply rooted. Obama started it. Biden truly carried it out to the point where liberalism and wokeism became the religion, and religion was pushed out. Department of Labor said that their faith offices became the DEI offices. So in place. So, we're not saying you can't have this or this kind of freedoms. You're just saying not at the expense of people of faith. And so religious freedom is at the forefront of what we're doing here at the White House Faith Office, making sure that we are that beacon, that we root out our own problems in our own government, and then become that beacon for internationally, because there are so many persecuted Christians, persecuted Jews. You just name it, name a country.
it's the worst it's ever been.
Right. And so what they tell us, the leaders tell us, is that you have to fix this here. You have to be that beacon of religious freedom so that the rest of the world can have that example. And then we're going to be fighting for it internationally. But as Pastor Paul says, so religious freedom, number one, protecting women and girls, which the president has already put into place. First of all, saying that there's a man and a woman. There's two genders.
That's fascinating.
Right.
He has been very clear on that. And
100%.
that confusion that has been out there now for so long, perpetuated and pushed by the government, there was a major correction on that. And I think it surprised people that he cared. Well, why does he care about this? But I think it's in line with everything you're speaking
Or
of.
he deeply cares, and one of the things we work on as well is giving parental right, because as you know, some states, parents are faced with a young child, 6 years old, 8 years old, 8 years old, being what they would call gender affirmative care, which is a sex transition with hormone blockers that are just devastating and something that is really not even reversible. And the kind of trauma. And I mean, come on, I started life very young. I'm pastoring at 23 years old. That's insane to me. I just turned 59 on Sunday. Been in ministry 40 years. I didn't know what I wanted for dinner back then. How do you not allow a parent to parent, or the things that we've seen in the educations
The school stepping in and making the
on and on and
decisions.
on.
Yeah.
So what President Trump did was just go, it was obvious you've got to start with there are only two genders, but it's also you're not going to be able to abuse children and hurt them in any ways. That parents have the right to be the parent, not the government. Yeah, and that's the basic, I think, and Jenny, so many
Yeah,
others.
I mean, that gets the biggest applause line too, and who would ever think that a president of the United States would have to say there are just two genders? And then strengthening family and marriage, creating this Christian bias and anti-Semitism task forces to combat them, and then we are relying for too long too. Faith-based programs have basically told no by the government. If you pray, if you light a candle, if you do anything along with your amazing programs, you're not going to get any funding for the government. We're going to ostracize you. We're going to discriminate against you. And that's what's happened. So faith-based programs, whether you're talking about, and these are some of the tenets on foster care and adoption, on mental health, which we call flourishing minds, on poverty alleviation, on prisoner reentry, on battling substance abuse. Those are the tenets, part of the tenets of it. That faith-based programs are 80% plus success rates. Why wouldn't we the federal government partner with 80% success rates,
Yeah.
where the secular programs are 30% or less success rates? So we are going to allow that back in. We're going to partner with faith-based programs. You don't have to go to a program that's faith-based if you don't want to, but we're going to allow that to happen so that we can actually solve the problems of Americans. It's not about this nebulous faith program and this nebulous money that's coming from the government. It's about that American that's battling whatever they're battling, and that being able to be helped by us in a real way. And so, yeah, we can't separate people of faith as Americans. They're Americans and they have every right to have a voice in this government as every other American.
Well, and the data shows, I mean, and this is not me making it up. Every mental health data shows that you're happier, you perform better, you do better in life when you read the Bible, when you go to church. I mean, this is
Science.
it's science. It's
And the
remarkable.
universities are coming out with it, from Columbia to even Harvard. That so pushing. So it's quite interesting.
We are running out of time here, but one last question for you. And it's a big question, actually. Look, you're in this role. You face critique. Over the years, you faced critique, all sorts of different things. I don't even have to name them. How do you deal with that? What is that like for you to see headlines around things you've said? And we all make mistakes. I'm sure there are times you said, "Oh, I could have said that better." But what is it like to deal with that?
Yeah, criticism is part of the price you pay to do anything great. And I always say hate is very educational. If you find out what people or hate about you, you also find out what makes you so valuable. And the reality, Billy, this isn't about me. This is about this office. This is about the good works. If I walked away today and said goodbye, so would the critics. This has very little to do about me. So how do I handle it? It's just another day in the office. Like I'm like, okay, because it just doesn't, I mean, literally, and I'm saying this respectfully, it is so hard to find a really fair and balanced journalist.
Oh, absolutely.
And, most things that are said are, an easy defamation, slanderous, liable case. Easy. And I've been there before. I've done it before. I keep Lively and Singer on standby there. That's the best. But however, do I want to spend my energy fighting something that's not even true? Now, if it's going to have material impact, which it never does. I mean, it's like it never does. Somebody wants to label me. One day I'm labeled this, the next day I'm labeled that. And it's like they don't even have real definitions of it, So it's like, it's just ridiculous. So what do? I just keep doing. I keep my hand to the plow. And I'm here, and Jenny's here to fulfill President Trump's mandate and vision for all people faith. We've had an iftar dinner. We've had a Passover dinner. We've had an Easter dinner. We've had every person you can imagine in, from Muslim to Jewish to Christian to Catholic. We can get into all the different Protestant type of denominations, Orthodox. My goodness, everyone. So every major religion has been in the White House. Over 1,000 faith leaders come through so far. Think about that. We're just not even 100 days in yet. And so this is the difference at this office that President Trump mandated. And Jenny and I have the honor of leading with masses of others that work under this office to help all people of faith.
Well, I appreciate you both taking the time today.
I would love to say something about Paula
Please.
because she's a strong woman. How does she deal with it? One, she's a very strong woman. She's a woman of faith. I mean, she lives it, breathes it. She's in it. It bothers me when I see some of the criticism. We met 9 years ago, not knowing each other, and I got to see her in the walk with her husband, with the president, with her family. We've become friends now. And I always tell my husband, like, if there was something off, I would have seen it.
Yeah.
But she is so gracious. Even people who are critics, if it's good for the president, she will bring them into the White House. She doesn't do like a litmus test of who can come in here. If you're a faith leader and you want to work with the government, you want to work with this president, she has them in there. Sometimes I get upset because I'm like, well, you don't deserve to be in here. But because of her purpose and because she's a woman of God, she does this, and she's strong. On the other side, I would say to different people, of why the president would have her in this position. You really have to respect the relationship that happened 24 years ago. For other people who think that they could carry the mantle, they have no idea what she does. They have no idea what it takes to sit in this seat, to work in this White House, to work for a president for this country and defend people's faith and religious freedom. Have no idea. And nothing can replace a 24-year relationship, personal and faith relationship that they both have. So there is nobody else who could do this job than her.
Oh, Jenny, thank you. I say, Billy, to that, I have defined myself as a professional doorkeeper for God.
That's all for today's Newsmakers. Make sure you head on over to check out our new documentary, Investigating the Supernatural Miracles. You can go to cbn.com/supernatural. I travel the country investigating some of the most incredible claims of medical miracles. Again, it's cbn.com/supernatural. And we'll see you tomorrow for another episode of Newsmakers.